Oke, selamat siang, bapak-bapak dan ibu-ibu sekalian. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's first panel discussion on the crucial topics of national digital identity, identity security, and also the payment market trends. My name is David. I'm the IT Director of Rintis, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for this session, along with our international experts. So as we increasingly navigate our digital world today, I think most of us are all quite digital. The way we establish and secure our identities online has become a cornerstone of innovation and trust. National digital identity systems are not only redefining how consumers or citizens interact with government and commercial services, as Rick has shared in the earlier presentation, but it is also influencing the global standards of online security and privacy. It is really pushing the edge to make sure that our privacy, our confidentiality, and our integrity are ensured, right? And today, as we have all the expert panelists here. We will delve into the importance and considerations of implementing the national digital identity, how it all fits within the broader whole of digital economy. We will also look at the technologies for identity security, and we will also interact to understand a bit more some of the more pressing questions on the emerging trends shaping the payment industry today. So before we begin, let me quickly introduce again, we have Rick. He really brings a whole wealth of experience in design and implementation of Australia Connect ID. We have Roger. Roger is really a global security expert in identity and payment security. And on screen, we have Mehdi. He is also a global expert in digital payments and evolving trends. We will start the session with a few questions directed at our panelists, and then later on in the second part, we would actually we will address some of the Slido questions that were collected during the presentation of our expert panelists. And we will also encourage you to actively engage. The Slido QR will still be up. We may not be able to address all the questions that you key in live during this moderation session, but rest assured, we will collect all the questions and then we will come back to you probably offline if we can't address it in this session, right? So to kick off, I think it's important for us to really understand why a national digital ID is a key enabler for the whole of digital economy landscape. And for that, I'll probably need to pass the question to Rick to maybe explain a bit more from his experience with Connect ID Australia.
Thanks, David. So really, the big driver for digital identity, whether it's a government-issued system or an exchange, doesn't matter. But the big driver is we do so much more online than we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago. The way that we prove our identities, the way we prove who we are, hasn't changed. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you wanted to open a bank account, you'd walk into a branch and you'd show your government documents and you'd set up a bank account. And then slowly, as that has become more digital, all they've done is just take the passport and the driver's license and take a photo of it. Or if you've got a really modern government, then you might be able to get a digital version of the document, but it's still a digital version of the document. So what that does is just proliferate the amount of personal information and sensitive document information that's out there. And then as you see the rise of hacking and scams coming through, data is just leaking and leaking so often. So creating a way of proving who you are online that's easy, that's low friction and is secure and is a mitigant against future hacking or future leak is it has to happen. Otherwise, you just lose all trust in digital transactions. And so, as payments people in the room, we all know that the security of the payments process is paramount in an online world. Well, the identity component's no different. So that's the real driver for why, I guess.
Maybe another question I have for Rick is, I think Australia Connect ID is an example of a decentralized national digital identity. And I think Rick did mention about SingPass. SingPass Singapore is a national digital identity that's operated and developed by the Singapore government, but it is a centralized model because all the services are all provided through the SingPass mobile app. Whereas in Connect ID, there is an exchange that will bridge the identity providers with the identity requesters, right? I think it's probably good for Rick, if you can, share with us how did Australia actually consider centralized versus decentralized when Connect ID was conceived? And if you can share some of the key considerations so that maybe for Indonesia, we could also take some of the learnings and move ahead. Thanks.
Absolutely. There was a guy, I went to a conference a few months back, and I'd love to say who it was if I could remember so I can credit them, but they said data is culture. And the examples of SingPass or MyGovID in Australia or RealMe in New Zealand are a perfect example of that. So I was saying this over lunch, in Australia, we hate our government. So nobody trusts the government, everyone hates the government. And so I contrast that with Singapore, where it is such a tightly controlled society and a society that interacts with their government day in, day out, and a much more centralised society, that you roll out SingPass in Singapore and sort of within the blink of an eye, everyone has one and everybody's using it everywhere because all the businesses have got on board as well because they kind of have to. And if you look at Aadhaar in India, which is a similar sort of model and is essentially ubiquitous these days. Aadhaar was created because you've got hundreds of millions of people who are essentially undocumented and outside of the main institutions. And so Aadhaar was created as a way of, get a biometric scan of a person and you can create the identity around that. And so it brought people into the system. So both of those things took off. But in Australia, we don't have either of those sort of factors. And we also have an inherent distrust of the government. So you could do something like SingPass and you could try it, and the government does, and it's called MyGovID. But the problem is that people haven't downloaded it, or if they have, there's nowhere to use it, and so you sort of come back to the option problem. New Zealand has done exactly the same thing. They've got a government one that nobody uses. So having in Australia, it's actually all about choice. You'll be able to use MyGov if you want to, but you can also use your bank if you want to, and you can use your choice of banks or Australia Post or somebody else. And that, in our culture, that's the thing that's most valued. If you force it onto someone, they won't do it.
Okay, thanks, Rick. So I think we take it away that we need a close collaboration with the government. We need to work closely with the government. Also with what is available in the industry, and then from there we see what is the key objective that we want to achieve, right? The time frame, the security, and also the scalability in our design and implementation of any national digital identity systems. I think probably a question that is interesting is probably on the technology side of it, and this may be a question for Roger. Right? With the increased use of digital identity, what are your thoughts on the security risks and technologies that could be adopted? And also, given the fact that there's a difference between a centralized and a decentralized model, like for a country like Indonesia, it's in the triple digit of millions population that we need to deal with, whereas in Singapore, it's a single digit million of population. That's why maybe a centralized model is easier to manage, right? We really need to look at technologies that are not only secure, but probably also scalable, right? In order to support the scale and high volume of transactions. So Roger, if you can, probably provide a few pointers.
Okay, I think First of all, we have to understand that the National Digital Identity License Pass or Connected ID is a tool for the eKYC process, for eKYC purpose. And the technology solution of FIDO, like mentioned, I introduced in my presentation, is about authentication process. So, for example, like national IDs, we will apply the national ID while we open in the bank account or registration or like login or for enable some bank function, payment function. But if every time we use the national ID, the digital ID, to authenticate our identity while we log in the bank account, that will bring a lot of burden to the server, to the government. So combined with the FIDO authentication with national ID, I think it's a perfect solution for both know your customer and provide a very reliable authentication method for user to log in to make online payment. In Taiwan, that I just introduced the mobile ID. So every time when the user wants to register in the bank's account, they have to, when the first time they register the bank account or enable a new function, they have to authenticate their identity through mobile ID. It's very widely used in Taiwan. Okay. For example, like if we want to enable FIDO, the first time we have to register our FIDO authentication with mobile ID in many banks. And then for the following login or payment verification, we can apply FIDO for authentication. So banks build up the FIDO server, and government or build up a centralized national ID system. And it's a combination usage for both, for the bank, for the enterprise to verify their user's identity.
Okay, thank you, Roger. So I think the key word here to keep in our minds, and I think if there are questions on this, we'll be happy to address, is a four-letter word. It's called FIDO. FIDO, I think, represents fast identity online, right? It's actually a passkey method. I think from presentation earlier, it's based on a passkey, so there is no password or credentials that are being exchanged in order for a login, and in order to satisfy the scalability, it will be a hybrid approach whereby FIDO could be used as a method to perform repeated logins in combination with a biometric, right? And that would actually reduce the maybe on the technical side to do a credential validation on each login. So I think this is quite useful. I think we'll definitely keep the FIDO in mind, right, as we embark on the journey here, not just for national identity, but I think probably also for some of the financial service providers and the banks here. Yeah, I think probably FIDO is one of the new trend to look into. Thanks. So I think maybe one related question that I have in my mind, what is how FIDO compared to multi-factor authentication? I think it's quite common in the financial industry, we come across multi-factor authentication, and some of the regulators, they also push it very hard, right? But FIDO, I think the terminology is maybe not so common, right? Maybe it's good if you can give us a brief. How does FIDO compare to multi-factor? Are they the same or?
Okay, let me illustrate the basic concept of multi-factor authentication. I think there are three factors used to confirm a user's identity. The first is that something you know, for example, like your password, your birthday. And the second is that the step you have, for example, like your mobile phone or a token or a USB key that belongs to you, okay? And the third one is the something you are, for example, like your Face ID, your biometrics. So multi-factor authentication requires at least two of them in place. But with FIDO, as you can see from my presentation, the device acts as an authenticator. This satisfies the fact factor, something you have. Then during the final authentication process, the user authenticate with the biometrics. We use Face ID or we use biometrics to authenticate, to finish the authenticate process. So this is satisfy the second factor, that something you are. So this is the two-factor authentication. And FIDO is exactly the two-factor authentication. And as I discussed with the banks in Taiwan, we found that the OTP is really vulnerable. And we also studied the entire business process of the biometrics authentication by banks apps. There is still some weakness points that the biometrics authentication by the bank apps cannot prevent phishing attack entirely. It still has some weakness point that the man in the middle attack can hack the push message from the app and finish the authentication through the app, but still steal the card holder's information. So I think FIDO is the technology that developed to overcome this problem. So in my opinion, FIDO is inherently the two-factor authentication, and it's a more secure authentication method than banks app biometrics authentication.
Thanks, Roger. So I think the takeaway here is it's very interesting. To answer the question, how does FIDO compare to multi-factor authentication? FIDO is inherently multi-factor, but multi-factor is not FIDO, being the reason that FIDO is resilient to man-in-the-middle attacks, whereas multi-factor authentication may not be.
Very accurately.
Right. Okay, thanks, Roger. That's a very good summary. So I think we gotten some insight from Roger on the technologies that could be adopted. At least now we learn a new terminology called FIDO. And maybe now it's time for us to move over to Mehdi to look at the payment trends. And from the earlier presentation of Mehdi, I think, Mehdi, if you can hear me, there were some very interesting points that he highlighted in the presentation. The first one being the payment industry has evolved more in the last 5 years than in the previous 50. I think this is one point that caught my attention. The second one is, of course, very, very to home, is the rise of the domestic payment network. And I think that's something for us to be aware of. Now, the third one is the ever-increasing adoption of digital wallets, right? So digitization is growing. The domestic networks are becoming more dominant, but yet digital wallets are rising. And despite all the above digitization, payment cards in circulation are still growing, especially contactless cards. So maybe a question that I have for Mehdi is the first one being, how do you see the future evolution and convergence between digital identity and payments? And is there still a future for card-based payments, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, thank you, David. I think that's a very interesting question, especially for me, because as you know, IDEMIA is sitting at the intersection between payment and identity technology. So for the first part of your question regarding the convergence between payments and identity, I will maybe first echo what Rick and Roger were saying. So number one, when you talk about payments, if you need to open an account or apply for a card, it requires some sort of eKYC and ID proofing, right? So that's where you will use the identity process for such purpose. Or when you enroll a card to a wallet, there is an IDNV process. So in a sense, you are verifying the identity of the card holder or the person opening the account or applying for the card. Sometimes it can be you may access to the root of trust. And I think Rick mentioned about the government-issued identities, which are more kind of centralized. He mentioned the other system that actually IDEMIA built in India. I think we have 1.3 billion records in that database, which is not the case everywhere for many reasons. including for regulatory or more decentralized ecosystem, where you may leverage some sort of exchange or platform brokering the IDs, some sort of reusable ID. So that's on the enrollments or the opening. And then Roger was mentioning that when you transact online, and I think this is where payment is broken, because if you need frictionless and secure online payments, we need to remove the PANs and the password from the checkout page. And multi-factor authentication, or so-called strong customer authentication using multiple methods, can be a solution, but very often it can deteriorate the user experience, right? And sometimes be clunky when you are prompted to authenticate off-band or using an OTP or an email. And this is where that's true that the payment passkey is the most elegant and secure solution. It does leverage the biometric technology to authenticate and to bind a payment instrument to a device. The digital identity in this case, the identity verification, may occur when you create this payment passkey, right? And that be the best way to that frictionless experience. So I would say that in the end, payment is just movement of fund between individuals or businesses. And the real act, which is occurring during the transaction or the enrollment, is a verification of the identity and later on an authentication against that credential. So payment is just the use of the digital identity and the authentication, and they are obviously converging in a digital world. So that's to paraphrase, echo Rick and Roger, and that will lead me to the second part of your question, right? The future of cards, which is another findings in the market trends. So we were asking ourselves, because as a company, I think we have historically operating in the payment space. For the anecdote, we're starting with to print banknotes, paper money, right? Then we moved to with the card and the smart card, and later on scaling from paper to plastic to digital, and even trying to make it invisible with a biometric. But there is something on payment is that we have observed that payments are additive, right? We still carry some coins, use our cards, and often on our phone to pay. Having said that, the usage may decline over time, right? From one method to the other, one form factor to the other, and from one rail to the alternative. And in terms of the coexistence, we used to see the app as the companion of the card, and more it is the opposite. The card is now becoming the companion of the app. So this coexistence will for some time. There is one area, maybe to finish on the convergence. We tried to load payment and identity credential on the same form factor on a card, right? And realize that the private and the commercial spheres, they don't coexist that well, right? Something which is maybe because of the personal data and the commercial data behind it. And then when we looked at, we mentioned about the emerging, the fintech, the neobank, and we realized that they started with a digital first experience, but most of them are now issuing a card, to their consumer. Look at the Apple Card in the US and what all of the fintechs are doing. And why? Because this is the last link between the cardholder and their bank, especially in a branchless banking world. And more they are taking advantage of this real estate to put their brands and the convergence of identity and payment. Definitely the future of cards, the usage may decline, but they will coexist for a while.
Okay, thank you, Mehdi. I think it's very insightful. Maybe one question I have. On the area of contactless cards, I think obviously the international scheme has a very big head start compared to local schemes, even among the different regions in Asia, right? In your opinion, how important is it that a domestic card scheme should at least have a contactless specs in order not to lose out. In your presentation, you highlighted there is a tab for everything use case. If you could provide your thoughts on that, I think it'll be you. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, that's also a very good question. And remember the one tap or one scan in store and one click online or in-app, right? That's the view. But what is happening? And I think the best for me is to maybe remind the audience of some of the case studies. Visa and MasterCard, I said earlier, international card schemes, are elevating the technology bar. So domestic schemes, card schemes must be at least at parity. And RIC is on the panel. And FPOS in Australia is back in the it was the dominant way to pay with in excess of 80% market share. And after contactless was introduced by Visa and MasterCard the market share went down to 20%, right? Because then you are in a mode where you have to cap on this new technology. The same is applicable when you introduce NFC or tomorrow with the pay. Fortunately, FPOS under the leadership of AP Plus learned from that, and they are now in a spectacular revamp and bouncing back lately, even driving the markets. We mentioned about Connect ID, but also on the real-time payment rails and all of the methods, taking advantage of the regulation with the least cost routing merchant choice in a country where 50% of transactions are contactless. So that's number one. And then to finish with, the figure you cannot ignore is Visa announced that 80% of the transactions were contactless in store. And by 2027, 99% of the NFC of smartphones will be NFC. And in conclusion, you can tap your card or your phone in store, but you can tap it on your own device. And the introduction of the SOS technology is democratizing also on the side. So they will coexist with other methods like QR code, but they cannot be ignored.
Okay, thank you, Mehdi. I think we will keep that in mind as Indonesia also deliberates on the need for contactless card standard for its local scheme. I think that concludes some of the initial panel moderation here. Maybe the next part is really to look at some of the Slido questions that were collected from the earlier presentations. And if you do not see your questions here, please do not worry. Actually, we have all of them recorded because we do have quite a number of questions in. I think the team helped to summarize a few, and perhaps in the interest of time, we'll probably pick one from each panelist here to address. And the rest of the questions that we couldn't address in this session, we would definitely revert back to you after this, right? Yeah, if the event team could help display the Slido questions, please. So you can see these are some of the Slido questions that has been, maybe the first one is for Roger.
Okay, I think for secure and better user experience is sometimes they are conflict. So how to balance the user experience while maintaining security of the payment is very critical for all the financial institutions. For example, like we implement the EMV3DS on many issuers and acquirers. And in China, that we have most of the issuers that apply our system, but all of them face this, a problem is that the SMS OTP sends to verify the users, sends to the user's mobile device. It's not very stable. Sometimes the user cannot just get this message. So that is why we introduce biometric authentication. We introduce FIDO authentication to replace OTP for the issuer's system to not only make the payment process more secure and reliable, also provide a more user-friendly payment experience for all these cardholders. So that is one example like I would like to share that is about provide a better user experience for all the users. And yeah, the one more that I also have some data in my hand that from the FIDO Alliance report, the FIDOs achieved 100% login success rate. Compared with the email OTP, it's around 92%, and 40% login speed compared to SMS OTP, and 53% of faster login speed improvement compared with email and OTP. So FIDO is not only secure, but it provides a better user experience, frictionless, seamless on the payment and login scenarios.
So FIDO is not only just more secure, but also good for business with a lower reject rate.
Yeah, okay, that is the story that when we sell our FIDO solution to our client, I always share the same story.
Thanks, Roger. I think there's a second question here from Ibu Rosmaya. What measures are being taken globally to mitigate the growing financial losses caused by scammers, and how do these efforts compare against the different regions? Will you be able to share any thoughts on this, or we could also address it as a polls question if you prefer?
Is this a question for me?
Yes.
I think in Taiwan that in Australia people doesn't trust government, and in Taiwan at least half of the population is not support the existing government. And the serious fraud problem also raised the unsatisfaction of the people to the government. So people losing trust of the government. So government has to find something to do, get something to do to fight back. And so we mentioned about the new technology, but what kind of new technology the government should adopt? The best way, the best practice is proven global standard with the success use case. So the government, so why FIDO can be prevail and recognized in Taiwan's financial institution because it's a global standard, and so everybody recognizes it. So when the government push everyone to enhance their security on users verification, FIDO becomes the best solution for the government to adapt. But for the cross-country, that I think I'm not an expert, but the pain point in Taiwan is that when the fraud or the scam happen, the crime scene is always outside of Taiwan. For example, like in Southeast Asia. So when the frauds are arrested in Taiwan and go to the court, it's very hard to provide the evidence to support that the criminal behavior. So in the end, the penalty is very low. So I think we need international cooperation, work together in the government level to find something to work together and build up the cooperation for different countries to stop the fraudster and scammer to commit their crime.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Roger. So I think we have really run out of time. The other questions, I believe we would, as a post-meeting feedback, reply to the different parties who posed the questions. I think with that, we'd probably like to conclude this moderation. Feel free to continue to send us the questions, or even meet some of us off stage if you want to continue the discussion, right? But most of all, I would like to very much thank you everyone here today to join this panel. I think the takeaways here are really, for me to summarize, digital identity is really the key as a key enabler, the driver for the next surge in the whole of the digital economy. We learned a keyword thanks to Roger, FIDO. Not only is it more secure, it's good for business, and even more resilient with minimizing the man-in-the-middle attack. Card business, it seems like it's here to stay. And in order not to lose out, in order not for the local scheme to lose out in some of the tap for everything use cases, or even in the future innovation for NFCs, I think probably there's something that the domestic schemes need to think through on at least having contactless specifications to be considered. And of course, most importantly, the key takeaway here is always collaborate very closely with the government, the industry players, and also the technology providers to provide the best of class solutions that would be fit for purpose for any particular country that requires it. Okay, thank you once again to our expert panelists for sharing their expertise, and also thank you all for your thoughtful and engaging conversations. Thank you.
Thank you.